Hi, you wouldn't happen to know how to get to Fort Lauderdale, would you? Try and make your directions concise, because like David Freeman in Flight of the Navigator, we get lost easily. That's the charm of this cult sensation. Underneath the wisecracking robot and sparkly spaceship is one of the most bizarre, disturbed productions of Disney history. Flight of the Navigator wasn't just another sci-fi flick. It was a dream become reality, a chrome ghost ship that wouldn't go away even when Disney attempted to bury it. Behind its shiny veneer are tales of rewrites, catastrophes, close calls, and bizarre trivia that make it one of the most bizarre movies the studio ever worked on. And 6 feet under, or rather buried in the wreckage, are 20 strange facts that reveal how this film moved from being a creepy nightmare in a budding writer's mind to one of the greatest cult classics of the 1980s. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Star Vault TV, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. It all started not within a Hollywood studio, but within a budding writer's mind named Mark H. Baker. One evening, Baker dreamed of a boy who vanished in a spaceship only to reappear years later looking the same while the people around him aged. When he awoke, the dream would not disappear. He jotted down notes, scraps of images, and sensations before they escaped him. Those pieces evolved into a script named Vanished. But Vanished was not the family fun film we are familiar with today. It was dark, heavy, and eerie, more appropriate to Close Encounters of the Third Kind than Disney staples. In Baker's initial conception, the journey of the boy was nightmare rather than wish fulfillment. The alien vessel was not inviting. It was enigmatic, potentially evil. And when the boy returned home, it wasn't with celebration, but with the crushing burden of lost time. But the core concept, a kid snatched from his own era, thrust into a foreign new world, and then reclaiming his way back, was so strong that it couldn't be overlooked. That universal hook of fear and desire was inescapable. Disney acquired the concept by the time the darkness was tempered, the threat removed, and what was once a chilling tale became something more lighthearted and thrilling. What began as a bizarre midnight dream became the inspiration for one of Disney's most ambitious attempts at science fiction. Early on, however, the film came perilously close to being a much darker movie. Prior to Disney hiring Randall Kleiser to direct, they approached none other than Brian De Palma, the director of Carrie and Scarface. Imagine it, Flight of the Navigator as a paranoid thriller. De Palma's take would have skewed heavy on suspicion, government threat, and psychological fear. Rather than a buddy film, it could have traumatized children forever. Disney smartly recognized combining De Palma's darkness with a kids' movie would be like mixing oil and water, and they backed off. In doing that, they spared Navigator from being one of the most traumatic family movies ever produced. Even the title had a long journey. Prior to being Flight of the Navigator, the project went through titles such as Vanished, Space Boy, and Grounded. A few were too grim, others too immature. Disney hoped for a title that hinted at adventure without frightening parents. Flight of the Navigator eventually hit the mark. Adventurous, intriguing, but ultimately family-friendly. It gave viewers the illusion of a journey instead of a disappearance, and that subtle change allowed the film to develop its identity. The casting of the lead character was another sliding doors moment. Disney briefly thought of casting a boy who still used the name Lee Phoenix before they cast Joey Kramer as David Freeman. Yes, that Phoenix. Long before Joaquin Phoenix won an Oscar and became an actor, he was merely a child on the audition rolls. His raw intensity and seriousness might have sold David's bizarre destiny. But Disney needed somebody cozier, friendlier, and Joey Kramer's every kid appeal prevailed. If Phoenix had been cast, Navigator would have perhaps been a much darker, more serious movie. As it was, the role wedded Kramer to cult movie lore, although his actual life's path soon to take a tragic turn. One more casting twist. Sarah Jessica Parker was Carolyn, the eccentric NASA intern who clicks with David before sex and the city turned her into a star. Parker herself found the experience forgettable, a summer job she barely recalled years on. But to audiences, her big-eyed innocence offered a much-needed contrast to the pinched scientists and government officials. It's one of those tiny roles that became much more legendary in retrospect, demonstrating how movies can leave indelible impressions on viewers even when the performers themselves do not. Production itself was a peculiar saga. While exteriors were filmed in Florida, the neighborhoods, the skies, the woods, the sophisticated interiors of the spaceship were constructed and shot in Norway. European participation was needed to complete financing arrangements, so Disney relocated production to appease backers. Director Randall Kleiser conceded it seemed totally backwards, but eventually the unusual selection provided Navigator with a distinctive appearance. A combination of small-town American culture with highly advanced European-inspired design. That strange combination is partly the reason Navigator remains distinct from other 1980 science fiction films. The ship's own design was no simple assignment. Original drafts were clunky and uninspired. A producer quipped that it looked like a flying toaster with fins. The epiphany happened when designers looked at chrome teapots and were intrigued by the manner light curved over the shiny surfaces. Instantly, the ship seemed alive, flowing, more sculptural than a clump of metal. Disney then commissioned Michael Sheff, the same designer who brought about Back to the Future's DeLorean, to fine-tune the ultimate appearance. His work gave us one of the most iconic spaceships of the decade, sleek and elegant, with a Mercury-like quality that made audiences believe it could exist. That reflective quality led directly to another innovation. Years before Terminator 2 wowed audiences with liquid metal effects, Flight of the Navigator was experimenting with CGI reflections. The computer-generated transformation of the ship from matte shell to shining dart was one of the first Hollywood uses of computer-generated imagery in a refined, realistic manner. The CGI was still crude at this point, normally only used for wireframes or grid lines. But here was a ship warping light, shining in sunlight, morphing in real time. The technique was arduous. Rooms were full of computers and numbers were crunched for hours just to create a few seconds of film. But the risk worked, and James Cameron has since said he learned these very same techniques in preparing Terminator 2. For a low-budget film, Navigator opened the door on the digital future of the industry. Not all of it was computer magic, however. Within the ship, Max, the computer brain at its center, was largely brought to life through puppetry. His eye stalk swiveled, panels blinked, and lights flickered courtesy of groups of 4 puppeteers laboring out a frame. That combination of CGI and practical effects made Max a tangible presence. He wasn't merely a trick of the light, he was something David and the viewer could convince himself was genuinely there. It's why so many children believed he was alive, unpredictable, and nearly trustworthy. Randall Kleiser's involvement as director was unexpected as well. He was famous for Grease, arguably the biggest musical of all time. Transitioning from leather jackets and doo-wop to spaceships and aliens could be considered a jump, but Kleiser loved to change genres. From Blue Lagoon to White Fang, he never stopped moving. In Navigator, he even snuck in a subtle reference to his earlier work. The film begins in 1978, the same year Grease took over the world. One of the most iconic aspects of the movie is Max's voice. If it rang a bell, then that's because it was Paul Reubens, a.k.a. Pee Wee Herman. Back then, Reubens was such a pop culture phenomenon that he didn't want his popularity to hijack the film. So, in the credits, he used the pseudonym Paul Mole. Children didn't realize then, but Pee-wee was the wisecracking alien kids fell in love with. Ironically, Max wasn't always a comedic character. In early drafts, he was a chilly deadpan guide, useful but spooky. The directors intended for him to be untrustworthy. But once he scanned David's brain, Max changes, picking up David's slang, his sense of humor, and even Reubens' Pee-wee laugh. That shift was deliberate. It was a reflection of his evolution from aloof machine to wicked pal. Initially, however, Max was designed as a HAL 9000-style bad dream. Icy, controlling, nearly sinister. If Disney had gone with that take, Navigator would have been frightening rather than winning. The remake rescued the character, and the movie, The music was unconventional too. Rather than a grand orchestral soundtrack, Alan Silvestri sounded out the synclavier, which was among the first digital synthesizers. Then, it was a $1 million behemoth that took up rooms and generated otherworldly textures that complemented the space-age look of the vessel. The outcome was a score that was like nothing Disney had ever released, pulsating, glimmering, and very otherworldly. Decades before electronic soundtracks were the norm, Navigator demonstrated machines could compose music as emotional as a symphony. A great deal of strangeness was also cut from the editing room floor. Axed subplots involved an encounter where David, in 1978, encountered a young Carolyn for a fleeting moment, setting up time travel paradoxes. Other scripts filled in the alien life forms in much more gruesome detail or detailed how scientists reverse-engineered sections of the ship from David's memories. Disney trimmed those scenes for fear of overwhelming or frightening audiences. What was left was the skinnier, more child-friendly version fans grew to adore. The commercial side of Navigator was just as hectic. It started under Viking Film, a small production company that folded halfway through shooting. Disney cleaned up the pieces, but, scared after the failure of Return to Oz, didn't want their reputation attached too closely to another commercial sci-fi risk. So, they took care of U.S. distribution while foreign markets fell to others. In Australia, the movie even released on Warner Brothers with not a Disney logo in sight. To foreign audiences everywhere, Navigator never felt like a Disney film. It was a lost sci-fi oddity floating between studios. When the movie finally opened in 1986, it grossed around $19 million domestically, nice, but not spectacular. It opened during a Disney season of its own Great Mouse Detective and the disastrous failure of Howard the Duck, which overshadowed box office talk that summer. Navigator slipped quietly through movie theaters. Its greatest success came later, on VHS rental tapes, on cable TV reruns, and by word of mouth. That's how it became a cult classic,